Alright boys and girls, everyone's favourite far-left Greens moron Sarah Hanson-Young has published an article in The Age. She's playing the victim, she's pushing far-left abuse and far-left stereotypes, so I thought we'd go through it and just have a bit of a laugh at her expense. She already starts off with the wonderful title, "A dark and angry section of our media needs to be called out, Sarah Hanson-Young." When I first walked into the Parliament in 2008, I knew that I already had three significant targets painted on my back. I was young, progressive, and a woman. Ooh. I was still up for the challenge because I wanted to debate policy boldly and give as good as I got and stick up for those who didn't have a voice in Parliament. With comments like this.
And here we have a middle-aged bloke in this place telling professional working mothers that they don't deserve support in childcare.
I think women around this country are sick and tired of being made to feel responsible for the fact that men cannot control themselves and deal with their own issues. It is not women's fault that men behave like morons and like pigs.
I knew it would be tough, and I knew I'd have to be strong. What I didn't know was that due to my age and my gender, I would have to brace myself against abusive ridicule of my private life, constant body shaming, and an immediate campaign of sexualised rumours whipping through the Parliament and the press gallery. You mean politics is a dirty game full of abuse and attacks from political opponents? Someone stop the presses. I don't think Sarah Hanson-Young was warned. The continual humiliation, innuendo and insults coming from the mostly male voices in the conservative media nearly had their desired effect. There were times in those first 5 years when I wanted to pack it all in and let the bastards win. Well, maybe she should have, and then she wouldn't have had to deal with such horrible abuse from such evil
Morons.
Because you see, according to Sarah Hanson-Young, if you're a man and you're critical of a woman, it means you're a horrible human being. And that's pretty much what she's saying. Men get attacked constantly if they're in Parliament. They get called horrible names, they have their families attacked, they get slandered. But apparently it's not okay to attack a woman like Sarah Hanson-Young, who is an absolutely horrendous individual who loves to say things like this.
I find it galling to be told by a middle-aged bloke in this place, is a middle-aged white guy.
Even now, as a 36-year-old federal senator with more than a decade's experience in the Parliament, there are still members of the media who would rather hurl insults at me than refer to me by my correct title. Paul Murray of Sky News strangely refers to me as the hyphen due to my double-barreled surname, a name he took straight from the trolls on Twitter. Others simply call me a silly girl or a Trump devotee, favourite, a nasty woman. Well, maybe that's because she is a nasty woman, and it is horribly hypocritical of her to complain about being insulted in this manner when she insults people like this.
Minister Morrison is a sociopath.
There is a particularly dark and angry section of our national media that needs to be called out and held to account. Sky News, the Australian newspaper, and the News Corp tabloids, all of which are owned by Rupert Murdoch, as well as the shock jocks on Fairfax-owned 2GB and 2UE radio stations, are regularly the worst offenders when it comes to attacking and belittling women in public life who they don't agree with. Maybe it's just because these women are actually saying things that these so-called shock jocks strongly disagree with. But she can't admit that she's saying things that they really don't like, and they're probably having some genuinely good arguments against what she's saying, because as we all know, she's a horrendous human being who has very little to say and very little to add to the public discourse other than moronic insults. She can never admit that maybe they actually have a point about her, maybe her character is flawed, but no, she's a poor woman who only gets insulted because she's a woman and blah blah blah, woe is me, patriarchy, etc, etc. There are, it must be said, others who work within those organisations who are fine, talented and fair journalists. But I'm talking about a very specific type of political and social commentator here. They wield enormous power in shaping our national discourse, and they almost exclusively represent an angry, ageing and overwhelmingly male audience. How sexist and misandrist is that? Obviously, anyone who attacks her must be an evil male. Poor woe is me victim woman. Evil male men. Horrible misandry or misogyny or whatever it is. It must be misogyny because she can't possibly be saying things that people strongly disagree with. It's all because she's a poor woman's. And my favourite paragraph in the whole article. Over the years, Daily Telegraph columnist and blogger Tim Blair alone has written dozens of articles and opinion pieces about all aspects of me and my work. Throughout these, he has referred to me, or highlighted others' references to me, as Sarah Hanson-Dumb, fairly accurate, the Swamp Sow, and the Cry Girl. So isn't Tim Blair just absolutely hilarious? And perfectly describes her, I think. It's a fairly accurate description of a person who says things like this.
It is not women's fault that men behave like morons and like pigs.
He has insinuated that in the future I would be transgender, have no fixed sexual identity, and would be too fat to walk down the aisle of a train. Oh, how could he possibly make fun of a woman in politics? Oh, the horror of it all. How hypocritical is this? This woman is the same kind of woman who would turn around and say, well, women are strong enough to be in politics. Women can do everything. Women this and women that. But as soon as a man makes fun of her, as soon as a man is critical of her in the public sphere, all of a sudden it's, woe is me, you can't say that. I'm a woman. Oh, my feelings. Oh. It's just an absolute load of hypocritical rubbish, typical of far-left idiots like Sarah Fascist Young. She continues here, it's just blah blah blah, more victim blaming. The second part's fantastic though, where she goes into one of her pet peeves, slut-shaming. In its simplest form, it is the shaming of someone due to their sexual behaviour, real, imagined or made up. Whether it's done via rumours, slurs or innuendo, and whether it's whispered or shouted, the effect is the same. This kind of shaming is almost exclusively reserved for women, and like most forms of sexism, it's about power and control. It keeps women in rigid behavioural controls and can be deployed to bring us down for reasons that have nothing to do with sex. Actually, that's not true. There is a very specific purpose for slut-shaming that evolved actually over millions of years. And that is to prevent women from sleeping around, having sex with a large number of men, and potentially fathering children to men who will run off, or fathering children to a man who isn't the man that ultimately raises the children. It actually has that specific point to it. It's deep into our biology, and it's an important way to bind our society together and regulate the roles of each gender. She whines and moans about slut-shaming and, oh, it's just women, it's all about controlling women. But there's also shaming for men, and that's deadbeat shaming. Men get utterly pilloried if they don't pay child support, or if they don't have a job, or if they're not high status enough and the woman leaves them for a higher status male. That happens all the time in our society. But for some reason, in her mind, it's only slut-shaming that's a problem. There's lots of kinds of slut-shaming, or lots of kinds of shaming, I should say, and it all serves a specific purpose. Fat-shaming is one of them, and fat-shaming is about getting people to not be so overweight and maybe pick up some healthier lifestyles. As for slut-shaming, it's also about preventing children from being forced to be raised by a single mother. Now, a single mother is statistically the worst thing that you can inflict upon a child. It rapidly or dramatically increases their chances of being sexually abused, becoming drug or alcohol addicted, or being beaten or going to prison, and a whole swathe of other things. Slut-shaming serves a purpose, and if she doesn't like having people insult her or abuse her, first of all, maybe she should get out of public life, and if she's in public life, she probably shouldn't be saying things like this.
Minister Morrison is a sociopath.
It is not women's fault that men behave like morons and like pigs.
So she just whines and moans and continues on the path that you'd expect, where she cries victim, poor woman's, women are always the victim of this shaming, that shaming, this is a woman who's a victim of it, etc, etc, etc. Apparently women are the only victims in society. Someone should show her the statistics of the number of men who are killed violently or commit suicide or are homeless and all these other things that obviously she doesn't care about because men are the victims and in her mind only women can be victims. But she sums it up fairly nicely with calling out slut-shaming is still a momentous and perilous task, and not everyone who has experienced its chilling effect is able to speak up. Maybe that's because they're being slut-shamed for a reason. Do you ever think about that? Obviously she hasn't actually thought her opinions through, she's just spewing off far-left rhetoric. Those of us in the privileged position to do so can and should call out slut-shaming. Naming it breaks the silence it creates, and calling it out breaks its power. Really? Are you really so sure about that? You sure that calling it out won't have people just turn around and say, yep, we're slut-shaming, because at the end of the day, you can only fat-shame someone who's fat. Therefore, you can only slut-shame someone who's up.
I want to give you the definition of a sociopath. It's characterised by a lack of regard for the moral or legal standards of society. A master deceiver and manipulator. Someone who will do whatever it takes to get what he wants with no regard for consequences.